Hi there, welcome to another episode of Sweat Strategy and Success. I'm your host, Soleil Rain, and in this podcast, we talk all about health and wellness and how you can get involved too. In this episode, Manori and I got to talk about her own story of founding Numa Being, the highs and lows of starting a wellness startup, and also altered states of consciousness. Crazy, super cool. Something that I didn't know a lot about, and Manori gives us some insight on what this all is and what her business does, which is super cool. So now I'm going to tell you what I would do if I was listening to this episode. If you're sitting at home, grab an lollipop. For me, I'd put in my headphones and I would go for a hawker walk and I would buy myself a little treat. That's what I would do. Grab myself a little treat. I would save, subscribe, or like this podcast on any of your favorite platforms. And then I'm going to keep walking and I'm going to listen and I'm going to hear the incredible, inspiring story of how Manori Sumanasinghe started her own wellness startup. And it's going to be great. That's what I would do. Enjoy, and let's get started.
Sounds right.
Hi, Manori.
Hi, Soleil.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you, and thank you for having me here
Of
today.
course. Thank you for having me in your studio right now. Can you tell us a little bit about where we're at right now?
Yeah, so this is my design studio. We are in Central Plaza of Chinatown in Los Angeles. So I've been here for 5.5 years, right before the pandemic in 2019.
So I've known you, Manori, for 3 years now, just about. I think we met in 2021,
Correct.
right after
Oh,
I
wow.
graduated from college. And so here we are in 2024. It's very exciting. We've come a long way.
Exactly. And I'm so glad to see you doing the work that you're doing.
So I want to start off with kind of more of a fun question. You've turned Studio Something into a playful, joyful journey with the design work that you do. So what's the most interesting place that you found a piece of inspiration for your design work? Maybe a cafe or a doodle that you've seen, or maybe a piece of street art.
So my background is in architecture. And I think of architecture as like finding beautiful solutions to very pragmatic problems. And because the way I look at the world is through that lens, there's always this sort of keenness to like look at existing systems and improve them, whether it's a chair or a building or a space, square, whatever it is. It's sort of like looking at it like, how can I rethink it? Is there anything that I would do better to make the space or the object better? So the funniest inspiration I've found are in my pet. A lot of the furniture pieces I've done are coming from sort of like the needs that I have because of them. And then it evolves to something else and, co-opt it. But I'm always on the lookout for like very specific details of things and then always carry it with me to the next thing and the next thing. So I draw inspiration from poetry. Architecture and spaces are very much like living poetry. It's like you experience a space in a specific way, and there's a lot of poetry to how the details come together, how all these different elements of a building comes together or an object comes together. And then a space means nothing if there are no people who are living in it. So there's a lot of inspiration that comes from all of it, really. And nature. I love plants. I grew up in the tropics. So I try to integrate a lot of light and outdoors and plants and sort of this feeling of that we are a part of nature than we are the than. So, yeah, that's a big part of my design philosophy.
So you grew up in the tropics. Give me a quick snapshot of leading up to this moment.
Sure. Okay. So, I was born in Sri Lanka in this really tiny little town called Kandy. We probably had like 100,000 people living there, but it's a World Heritage City because it was where the last kingdom was. So, the entire town sort of like still is very preserved. When I grew up, you could go around the entire, like walk around the entire town in like 10, 15 minutes, probably. Very close-knit community. So I grew up in a family with a lot of like limitations, very modest means. That meant we didn't have a lot of toys growing up, didn't have a lot of means. My parents didn't have a lot of extra money to spend on things other than the basic necessities. So what that meant was we had to get creative at how we entertained ourselves. Because we didn't have a ton of toys, we had to like improvise how we played. And I remember when I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I was in my parents' living room. They had just gotten their share of rice from their siblings' house in their village. So they had piled it up in the living room to be processed. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, this is great. I can make things out of this. So I designed this whole sort of like my idea of a community at the point, like, oh, this is where the school is going to be. Over this hill is going to be this thing. And like, this is how the car is going to go. Oh, I need a road. Okay, I'll build the road here.
Very
Paper.
impressive for a child.
I was telling this to my business partner recently, and he was like, 8 is very young to have that much self-awareness. So I was like,
Seriously.
yeah. And then when I was around 16, I got an opportunity to represent Sri Lanka in this youth sort of a gathering. I represented Sri Lanka in that. I was one of the 70 kids that they brought together for arts. And then when I came here for the first time to the US at 16 for that program, was the first time I'd ever heard that I can do anything I want to do and be anything I want to be. And that just was like, oh, wow, I can. So I was like, okay, cool. And then I went back home and kind of was like, okay, what do I do now? Like, what do I want to be? And then I realized, oh, like, I am fascinated with building. I love drawing and art. I also have this weird fascination with physics and math. I was like, I think I want to be an architect. So I was 16 when I decided that.
I love that story about your childhood. I know the work that you do today with Studio Something isn't just about architecture, though, it's also about community. So, can you tell me more about how what you did after you came to the United States influenced the work that you do today?
So I worked under this most amazing two mentors and had an amazing time and kind of figured out how I want to practice architecture. And I realized the way they practiced was that they're both teachers. They both teach at universities, but they also do projects. It's a small firm and they don't limit themselves to just architecture. And I was fascinated with that. And I kept asking them questions about why they choose to practice architecture that way. And then I also expressed to them my sort of interest in overall well-being of people because I felt like building community, if you're just building the building and not creating the right conditions for people to come and gather and do things and thrive, kind of, you know, like a futile effort. It's only half of the equation. You're not taking care of the holistic view of it.
Mm.
The formative years in architecture, being under their mentorship and guidance, sort of set the tone for how I wanted to practice one day. There's a lot of things that I don't agree with. There are a lot of things that doesn't work well for somebody like me, a minority brown woman. So it's like there must be a way, but I'm kind of like burnt out. I need to take a break. So I went on sabbatical And I was like, do I stay in architecture? Do I leave? After about 2 months of not doing anything, give myself permission to sort of take a rest for the first time. And I realized I could just leave architecture or create a kind of firm that addresses some of the issues that I had issues with the industry.
What were some of the first projects that you worked on when you started your own firm?
There was a side project that my husband and I had been working on the side. It was just this idea, what if we create some kind of technology that helps people sort of get into deep meditative states faster? Both my husband Nelson and I have been um, teaching people meditation techniques for the past 10 years or so. We both come from meditation backgrounds and mindfulness backgrounds. I started my meditation journey when I was 11, and he started in his early teens. And on our own, two separate continents, two completely different upbringing, we had sort of like arrived at this point where we were seeing ourselves as spiritual beings doing this applied science field. He's an engineer, I'm an architect, and trying to find solutions for very real problems in the world. There was a moment where it all clicked. We were like, oh, we could turn this into something. This is where design, engineering, consciousness, mindfulness, they kind of converge. So we were like, great, let's do it. So we started designing this lounge chair that had technology embedded in it that helps people get into deeper meditative states.
So tell me a little bit more about these lounge chairs and what you do in your company, Numa Being, that necessitates these lounge chairs.
So Numa Being came out of various practices and various teachings and learnings and explorations that we had done on our own. And also having experienced a lot of burnout. We're like, okay, how are we going to bring all of it together? And in doing the testing, the 3 rounds of testing that we did, we realized, oh, this is actually a great tool, even just to relax. So what happens with burnout, at least in my case, what happened was that I, got into this sort of a way of operating where I'm required to continue to produce and create, but I'm so burnt out, so I'm forcing it out. And the creativity and the output is not the best. I'm just giving a fraction of myself each time I push myself. And I felt depleted, but also not like myself because I'm just like a robot, just working, you know, and taking the time to rest and reset during the sabbatical, and then allowing myself to test this technology and giving myself that time to kind of reset. I realized, hey, this can actually help with burnout, probably for people like me. So I was focusing on creatives, but then the pandemic showed that it can apply to other people also.
And what was it like turning this lounge chair into a functional business?
So I kind of had a narrative, but I was like, I've never done a startup before. I don't know what to do. I have a great network of friends, and my support system is amazing. One of my friends connected me with a one of their friends who coaches entrepreneurs like me, and she helped me understand a lot of the aspects of business, how to get methodical about testing, how to get disciplined about collecting data, and the kind of we brought in some expert and designed questionnaires about how to collect data. So the thing with spirituality and anything to do with sort of your personal inner world is that it's very subjective, right? Even when you think of things that are objective like colors or taste or like object, smells. Color, for example, you can talk about the spectrum, the frequency, the physics of it. But I don't know if you experience color the same way that I do. Does that make sense? So there is the physics, the very objective data part of it. But the human experience is not just that. There's this subjective way of the lived human experience that's so unique from person to person. And getting disciplined about looking at both, looking at the data, but also acknowledging these are the subjective aspects of these various phenomena and what it is to live. So through that, we realize, hey, we should speak about this not just from a spiritual wellness thing, but overall wellness. And at that point, we had developed a framework where we looked at 5 things. So we looked at the physical body, there's your emotional body, your mental state. And I speak about the two of them separately because one is about taking in the world, and the other one is processing and responding. So, emotions are about how you process, and your mental aspects, how you sort of take in what happened to you, break it down, and choose what to do with it, you know.
And how you kind of like talk to other people about it, correct?
Exactly. So, there's sort of like, but acknowledging both parts of it, you know, like how you process it, how you express it. And then there's the energy, which is the chi. In a lot of the native Asian cultures, there's this idea of chi, the subtle energy. So there was one thing that we realized in our mindfulness practices over the decades is that there's this very subtle part of ourselves that's quite not physical. It's a little ethereal, but there's a lot of influence from that matter into the world that we live in. So kind of like trying to understand what is chi, what is this subtle energy. And then as an architect, I had this sort of a profound sense that environment should be a part of the equation also, because you are an extension of the environment that you live in. Like it influences you so much, and vice versa. What you put out into the world, into your environment, is the reality, the physical, very real reality that you choose to exist in, you know. So, um, so there's this sort of understanding, okay, there are these 5 elements of this framework that we are creating, and these are the things that we are studying and interested in, and this is what we can help people when we talk about well-being. These are the 5 areas we choose to talk about. So we brought in the lounge chair as a way to help people first relax, just let your body relax, and then begin to feel your body. How are you carrying information in your body? Have you ever experienced when you're like stressed, you carry a knot or like tension in the back of your
Yeah,
body?
I think I get like tight in my chest and my upper back usually when I'm stressed.
That's what happens to a lot of people actually, because we have a body and the body stores some of that information, whether it's trauma, whether it's like tensions and stresses, you carry it in the body. So you don't pay attention to it if you're constantly in that state of like go, go, go. If you have a moment to relax and like stop and sort of connect with your body, then you can acknowledge, oh, I'm carrying something. Then you can choose, right? Information is power. So you can choose to do something about it or not, but consciously. You consciously choose to do or do not do something about the fact that you're carrying in your body. And that is empowerment, right? So we wanted to first help with that, help people just become aware. What they choose to do is up to them, but at least become aware this is what you're carrying in your body. And then what happens oftentimes is when people recognize they have something carrying that they're carrying in their body, like all this tension and worries and all of that they packed into the body, oftentimes it's like, I don't want to carry that. I want to do something about it. Okay, now can we share some tools that all these 30 plus years of learning that we've done, we've sort of built a tool belt, if you will. So it's like there's a hammer, there's, all these screwdrivers, all these tools that we use for various situations, various circumstances that is very useful to address and try and get back into equilibrium, right? So we hope to just help people kind of like relax, get back to feeling like yourself. And if you want to go deep, we can help with that. We have all these techniques that we've been teaching people in through the nonprofit, where we learned a lot of the altered state techniques, the IAC, the International Academy of Consciousness. There, we both learned about the science of consciousness and various research that's being done and various techniques, what are different types of altered states of consciousness and all of that. So this was like, okay, now everything that we've learned for like 30 something years, let's put it into action.
To go back a little bit to talk more about Numa Being as a business itself, what has been the biggest challenge of creating a wellness startup?
Timing was one, because we were in the middle of a pandemic. The second thing was like, this is a very unconventional approach to wellness. And I think like when I got into the wellness space, I realized, oh, I'm also a little unconventional in the sense that I don't identify as a spiritual teacher necessarily. I identify as an architect. I think like one. And I think of all these journeys that we are facilitating as a collaboration. I'm just in the background guiding you in your journey to get to where you want to get. And if you think about it, that's what architects do. We create the stage for the drama can take place, right? So one of the challenges was sort of like, oh, now I have to be in the front and sort of like get my face out there. And it was really, really challenging for me. And I think it got me out of my comfort zone, to be honest, because it forced me to sort of get comfortable with the idea of like being the face of something and knowing that, like, okay, the business is so tied to our personal story. It's going to be in the DNA of the company. So how do you tell your story in a way that feels authentic to you, but also that resonates with the general public? I struggled with that a lot because I'm very private, like even on social media, I like to be very private and getting comfortable with like telling my story. And I realized in telling my story, there were all these people who kept coming to me, creatives and women, people who's been through trauma, people from like LGBTQ communities, people who's been through mental health crises. They found some part of my story relatable. I was like, oh, there's a lot of power in telling your story, because I think it's important people see that they're not alone going through something. They're not the only ones who are experiencing something.
Mm.
And to see somebody who's experienced something and who's overcome it and thriving. And I think there's a lot of value in that.
Mm-hmm. So, a lot of social media marketing nowadays has to do with being authentic. TikTok and Instagram and, all these places where you're putting in short form content, people really love authenticity in businesses coming out with things. I mean, those are the businesses that do the best are the ones who are the most authentic. But it's still difficult, to try to make that content and try to put yourself, your emotional self on the line, because you're emotionally attached to your business, you're emotionally attached to your story. And so it's hard to intertwine those two. So what else about the marketing experience do you find difficult with all that being said?
Yeah, so I think I like the aspect of the authenticity because it makes it so much easier, like you don't have to have this dual personalities, but at the same time you do in a weird way. I found social media a little exhausting, social media marketing a little exhausting because it's working with algorithms and it's expecting you to put out content multiple times a day or multiple times a week at a minimum to build up engagements. And it feels like it's very click driven.
Mm,
So I always have to be on the lookout for what people want to hear. And I don't know, that feels authentic to what I'm trying to do.
mm,
A lot of the work that I had to do with my personal self discovery had to do with overcoming this aspects of looking for external validation. As a creative, it's challenging as it is because being a creative inherently means that your worth or your work's worth is entirely dependent on the audience that will validate your work. So to separate the two is like your self-worth has nothing to do with the quality of the work that you put out or the work that you put out. It's already difficult to compartmentalize those two. Now, on top of that, there's this aspect of looking for validation with my personal life philosophy through this business was very, very challenging. There's also this concept called genius zone. There's this author, scientist, psychologist, Gay Hendricks. He wrote a book called The Big Leap. There, he introduced this idea of four zones of being. So, one of them is your zone of genius zone. And the idea is there are things that you do that you're kind of like okay with it. You're not necessarily good at it, but you have to do it. And then there are things that you do, you're good at it, but you're not the best at it. And there are things that you're pretty good at, but still not the best at it. And there are things that you do that this is the thing that gets you up in the morning. This is the thing that makes you tick. That's the kind of thing that's in your genius zone. The thing that I struggle with, I think, in especially a spiritual business, is that I love doing sessions. I love working with people. I love designing launch chairs and designing the journeys and making the music. That whole process is so wholesome. I feel so full and fulfilled. I feel like this is who I am meant to be. This is me, right? And then there's the part of the business operations. And it got to a point where the business had to be like, okay, go big or go home. How big do I want to go, and what's the avenue that I want to take? Like, do I want to raise capital and bring in a team? And I wasn't exactly sure if that's my genius zone. I'm good at it, doesn't mean it's in my genius. So it kind of hit me hard. Hey, like I'm good at it doesn't necessarily mean it's in my wheelhouse of natural state of being at the best version of myself. So that was another challenge. So right now Numa beings at a state where we do custom orders of lounge chairs, and I work with selective clients. I especially like to work with creatives for obvious reasons because that's where I have the most expertise. This is where all these techniques have helped me the most, so I can relate to and I know the kind of challenges other creatives have. And I have developed a good set of skills and techniques to help people overcome the kind of blocks and creative challenges that you might have. But I also work with change makers and community leaders and stuff like that. We have to grow. So I'm looking to build a team. I have to find the right kind of team members who want to grow the company and do more lounges, sales, but also develop the company to offer more sessions, go have presence in other wellness practices and such.
I think that leads kind of perfectly into my next question, which is there's a lot of people out there who can successfully split, the creative part of a business and the business part of a business.
Yep.
So, but I can't imagine how difficult it would be. I know the psychology of like left brain, right brain. That's like a hoax by some crazy psychologist like 100 years ago.
Yep.
But I mean, it is still difficult to try to process those things together. So, how do you, as both a creative, being an architect and a business person, as you were saying, like having your genius zone versus your other zones, how do you successfully balance those two within your life?
So that's a real great question. This is why I'm doing it successfully for my architecture business. My architecture business is predominantly looking at building community, both creating spaces and creating activities so that people can come together. In the past few years, I've been focusing a lot on creating housing because that's like one of the areas that's really strained in LA. We are creating modalities for addressing affordable housing and homelessness and stuff like that. There's a certain amount of like business that goes into managing that part of my architecture business. It's hard, and I won't say it comes naturally to me, but I'm willing to do it because I really want to get the community building. Like, that's who I am at the core. That's the part that excites me about Numa being, that we are helping uplift communities. The part that doesn't necessarily excite me as much is the business part of it. Because I feel like for us to grow it to the next stage, we will have to bring in outside investments. And that comes with a whole a lot of challenges and opportunities on its own. And I'm not entirely sure which are the parts of it that I want to handle. And I think it comes from having awareness that I know this is what I like, this is what I'm great at, this is where I thrive. So, and that's the part that I want to continue to do with this part of the business, which is like creating stuff and doing sessions and continue to learn, do R&D, do like drive the vision and the creativity part of Numa being. And even doing workshops, like we successfully did a whole bunch of workshops and started building community around Numa being, around these topics, because it's very niche. Um, I think knowing myself, I can't do things half. So if I think about doing the whole thing and taking it to the next level, I'll want to be fully engaged, but I kind of not be really great at it because I'm not a natural businessman, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need someone in the team who will actually drive that part of it to complement the other attributes that we have in engineering, design, and sort of the spiritual background. When I was starting out in architecture, one of the two mentors that I spoke about before, the lady, she mentioned to me, Sing Ming Feng, my first female mentor in architecture. She said, if you're looking to develop, like build a business, find someone who complements you, but also brings in other skills that you don't have. And it applies to this business too, I think. Um, we live in this world where we are told we need to do everything and be everything all at once. You're supposed to have perfect mental health, do a 9 to 5, work out, eat well, cook well, have an active social life, la la la, do all of that. Like, who does that in reality, right? So,
Nobody, not me at least.
most of us, I think, and people who are doing that, they have a lot of help. So, the stage we are in, we kind of want to pick and choose and also love yourself a lot of grace that at certain times you're going to do these things, at certain times you're going to do the other things. How do I do it? I don't. Right? For the wellness business, I don't. I'm doing bare minimum enough to get certain things going. The other things I'm doing great. The mentoring that I do with my clients and sort of helping them recognize certain patterns in their life and how to sort of break through that and tap into their higher self is something that I'm actually really good at and I enjoy it.
Yeah, I've heard that from so many business leaders that if you want to do a good job in your business, it's not about you being able to do everything because you can't. Nobody can. Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and the best business leaders are the ones who choose the right team to be around them to do those jobs for them because everybody's going to do this correctly or maybe not correctly. They're going to do this the best that they can. They're going to do this
Yeah.
the best that they can. And so I've heard that from so many. So it's impressive, to have that restraint and hold back and say, okay, let me wait for the right people. Because I think as, a business leader, and I'm sure as a startup founder as well, like it's even more important to find the right people rather than the first person to come in.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that because there's like this is such a personal, close to heart business. It's not just any business. Like I'm not selling candy.
Hmm.
If I sold candy, even then I would care the right kind of person, finding the right kind of person. And I don't mean the perfect person,
Hmm.
right? For me, the perfect person is an imperfect being who has the potential. They have the capacity to grow with the company. They have to have the correct attitude and the right kind of vision. That's all that's required. And the attitude is so important because when you partner up with people, you're going into a kind of union. It's like a marriage, you have to be lockstep with each other. You have to pick up the slack where the other person can't. At sometimes in every relationship, in every arrangement, you can't show up 100% all the time. So these partners that you surround yourself should be able to sort of complement you and inject when you're not able to show up 100% of the time. And you do the same. There's reciprocity. So there needs to be respect. There needs to be mutual understanding and care about the cause that you're working towards. I think vision is the biggest thing. So, one of the things that I work with my clients a lot and my team members a lot is looking at the core values. Because if the core values don't align, it's very difficult to make everything else work. So a lot of the work that we do with our clients is to help people identify their core values and align with those core values, because that is integrity. How you show up and live your life by your values. Like, you can say, I care about my family, right? But if you're not spending time with them, if you're not investing your resources, your time, money, energy on these people that you say you love, is that really a core value? And you can say it's a core value, but how coherent are you? Like, if you're not showing up for that core value, why? Where's the incoherence there? Why are you doing that? Right? So that's the work that we do from the client side, and from our team side. Looking at your core values, it's like a good compass, like, okay, one of my core values is community. That means I'm constantly working towards uplifting everybody around me. And relationships are so important to me. That means, how am I investing on them? That means I'm paying them fair wage. I'm not taking them for granted. I appreciate them. I'm helping them in their personal growth, their professional growth, and vice versa. So finding the right people is not so much about finding the perfect person, but finding the imperfect beings who has the potential
Sounds right.
and the right kind of attitude and the right kind of vision.
So, to go back to human being a little bit, what is an altered state?
It's a good question. Altered states of consciousness. I was hoping to get back to it. Altered states of consciousness, they are everything in between your perfectly awake state, your conscious state, and your sleep state, your unconscious sleep state. There are conscious sleep states. I will talk about that. But in altered states of consciousness, what happens is that you're not in your fully awake state where you're fully present here right now. So daydreaming can be an altered state, actually. Dreaming is an altered state of consciousness. If you take some substances like mushrooms, you drop LSD, do ayahuasca. Or there are altered states that you don't have to take a substance, but you induce it through dancing or inhaling something. All these ancient practices that you hear about, there's the Sufi dancing that, have you seen, like, where they do this trance kind of like spinning?
No.
Okay, so there are practices, I think, the Afghanistan or Middle East, where you do these dances and you spin, and that like kind of gets you into this trance. So trances can be altered states. Anything that's not your conscious state or you're completely passed out, sleep state. There's a state called hypnagogia or hypnopompia. It just literally means in between awake and asleep. So hypnagogia is when you go to sleep before you fall asleep, and hypnopompia is before you wake up in the morning. There's this state in between being completely awake and completely falling asleep that you're kind of like in between. It's so full of imagery and very vivid. You don't necessarily have a lot of control over it. And what one of the interesting things about these states is that throughout history, different characters have used that technique for creativity. So we tend to focus a lot on hypnagogia and hypnopompia because we find that as a real good tool to work with creatives or work with people who are looking to connect some dots or connect the ideas, or like idea generation, looking for inspiration within yourself, or like insights within yourself. A lot of our journey is actually designed to get you to that state. Another thing that can happen is in doing meditation, these deep meditative states can lead you to higher states of consciousness. So, like lucid dreaming or lucid astral projection or expansions of the mind. These things can happen through various mindful states, or for some people, very spontaneously if they find themselves in the right kind of circumstance. And the hypnagogic state can be a stepping stone for those experiences. So we introduce people to first like very deep levels of relaxation with the hope of letting the body fall asleep and keeping the mind sort of awake and transition to hypnagogic state. If your conditions are right and you kind of have the predisposition, you could transition to a lucid dreaming experience or astral projection or like a mind expansion state, which happens not frequently, but it's not infrequently. It happens enough to know, oh, like that's really something to this.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that a lot with, as you mentioned, taking different drugs like ayahuasca or shrooms. People will have these like transitory experiences where they're brought into like a different part of themselves that they hadn't seen before and they pull out this so-called gem. Um, when I experienced the lounge chairs during my session here with you 2 years ago, just about, I wasn't really sure what to expect because I was a little bit scared because I was thinking, like altered states. Like I'm not really a big drug person, so I'd never like really experienced having this so-called altered state of consciousness before. So I was like, oh my goodness, this is going to be so scary. But it was a very relaxing experience. And I remember getting like deep into it and finally feeling relaxed enough to like really feel the experience. And I remember like feeling like I was floating for sure and feeling like I was turning and I remember like thinking in my head, like, oh, I'm sideways. Why am I sideways? Like I'm sideways right now. But I mean, like that's as far as I got with my own altered state experience, and I myself, just from that little bit, was like I felt so relaxed the rest of the day. I felt like the thoughts that were racing through my head as they do like 24/7. I felt at ease just from that experience. So, someone who were to use the lounge chair, what would their first experience be versus what would their 10th experience be like using the lounge chair?
Okay, so the first experience we usually, as I started doing more sessions, I got more experience into like, okay, don't send people into the longest journey that we have, like a 90-minute journey. Give them a little bit of it so that they know what to expect. So the first session is like a sampler of various techniques that we are using and give them a sense of this is what you can expect. And I think that setting the expectation is so important because some people come in expecting for their life to be turned around in one session. This is like, hey, you can experience it, a little bit of it, but there's a lot of kind of like you have to work at it. Not a lot of work because that's what we are here for, to assist you in that process, right? So that you're not doing it alone. But also, there's a certain amount of investment that you have to do in yourself while we are doing the work with you, right? So the first session is to give you a feeling of that. The journeys in the studio now are very focused towards if you want to work with me, let's see if we work well together, and then I will work with you, like customize. One thing that I notice with people who keep coming back and who keep doing sessions is that every time they come, they experience it very differently, even if they do the same journey. So, but every time I have a returning customer, what they say is, every time I do it, it feels like I'm going deeper. So, one of the things that it does is it establishes, each journey establishes a new sort of a bar for relaxation, like how relaxed your body feels. And then new sort of a standard for what it is to feel connected to yourself. So there's a lot of going deeper with that. Like every time you engage with the lounge chair and do a journey, you get a deeper understanding of yourself, or you get a deeper understanding of what it is to be relaxed in your body, what it is to connect with your own subtle energy, your chi, what it is to connect with your creative part of yourself. So now, let's say come into like a writer's block or something like that, um, or come up with like, hey, I'm exploring this idea, I want to connect some more ideas or something like that, and we'll just work specifically, like I'll customize the techniques and guide them through that. So you could do a package where there's a very specific focus, or you could do individual standalone sessions.
So, what does the future hold for Numa Being then?
So the future of Numa Being, I'm going to focus more on doing executive coaching kind of structure for now, working with creatives and change makers and community leaders. I get a lot of enjoyment out of helping people get clarity with what they want to do with their lives and integrating this spiritual techniques for your day-to-day life to make it more enjoyable. I want you to enjoy being who you are and feel productive, but also just be present. Yeah, right. So that I'm going to continue to do. And then we are going to continue to expand into partnerships. And then I'm looking to grow the company, but I'm looking for the team specifically. And we'll see where it goes. I'm staying very open simply because there's a lot of possibilities. And the market is kind of like maturing right now, a little bit more traction with more technology based mindfulness companies taking root. Yeah, so we'll see.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Manori, for joining me today and talking about your story and Numa Being and altered states and architecture and business and the whole thing. I really, really appreciate it. And I loved being here with you today. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. This has been really great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this work. And I hope your reach expands and this adventure that you're on is successful.
Thank you. If you are in the Los Angeles area and you're interested in the lounge chairs or Numa Being, you can go to numabeing.com. That's Neuma being being.com. If you want to learn about it, or if you're interested in Minori's collaborative studio for architecture, you can go to studiosomething.com. So studio sum, as in that sums up this episode. SUM. Thank you so much, Manori.
Thank you.